Hi, everybody. It wouldn't be a conference without a technical issue, so I'm glad that we can all share that together. So thank you for being here. Hi, I am Stefanie. I'm a communication designer and artist who likes to work with data above all other design materials. And I create data-driven designs for both art commissions and commercial work, ranging from information design to creating physical objects, animations, and public installations using data. Examples of which include this piece that was up at the Olympic Park in East London, made using slightly chaotic data that school children collected from the park, not for statistical insight, but to inform the design of a new data-driven park landscape. Or, it could be like this collection of 1,000 small drawings on index cards that visualize data from 1,000 frequently used English words, not to draw statistical insight, but instead to highlight the beautiful variation in the English language and then displayed at a British Council pavilion at a book fair in Mexico. Or it could be like this piece for Facebook's London campus, where to communicate the attractive quality of a powerful Facebook post, I loosely visualized data from a very long post on my timeline. So the white dot is the post, and then all of the other bits stuck to it are all of the comments and video that accrued around it. And so this was to inform the design of a mural at their offices in London. And then this is what the final looked like painted on the wall. So as you can see, these aren't your traditional bar charts or pie charts. And the best way I've found to describe the work I make is to say I'm a designer, illustrator, or artist whose favored creative material above all others is data. So instead of using photography or pencil or video and so on, data's the material that I choose to work with. And through using this material, or when I use it, I aim to communicate messages that go beyond the insights found within the data, where my end intention is to create work or communicate a message that's often more emotive and often more subjective than what's traditionally found within a chart or a data visualization. And also, I see data visualization as the design process that one can use to work with this design material, a process that as we move into the future will be as common a method for a designer to create and communicate with as much as the golden mean, color theory, design systems, and all of the other rules of thumb and tools that designers use daily to create harmonious, structured designs. And final thing about me, look at all the hand-drawn slides, but I don't really code. So as you can see on screen, I often work with data in my projects in a very handmade way, where I'll analyze data in this slow, analog manner, often physically grappling with it by hand. Now, I don't do this all the time, of course, and I often collaborate with developers, but even in these situations, literally getting my hands dirty with data is an integral part of all my projects. So I don't know, maybe that's why my computer doesn't like me. It's because I work with pencils, so it's getting me back right now. But an example of how I use data as a design material akin to pencil, ink, or watercolor can be found when I was commissioned by the UK's National Health Service to create artwork for every room in the inpatients wards at the Royal Papworth Hospital, which is a heart and lung hospital located near Cambridge, England, and it's moving from this old site to a shiny new site at the Cambridge Biomedical Campus at the beginning of next year. And for my artwork, it was all to be placed on these glass doors across the front of each patient room, and so it would be seen from both the inside of the room as well as down the corridors of the hospital. And as I needed to create artwork for 192 rooms across 3 floors, I knew I needed to automate the process through working with a developer, and that's when Mike Braunbjerg came on board as my collaborator. And besides the sheer enormity of creating work for 192 hospital rooms, I needed to fulfill the brief given to me, where all artwork commissioned for the hospital was to focus on the theme of the living building, consider the human body and be human-scaled, and be calming to patients who have just come out of very intensive surgeries. So taking everything into consideration, I came up with the following response to the brief. Now, the rooms are across 3 floors, so I decided to create 3 different designs that focused on the core parts of the body that the hospital specialized in. So the heartbeat and the heart, breath and lungs, and then the blood and blood flow that connect the two. So that's like the highly technical description of what this incredible hospital does. Now, to incorporate nature into the building, I decided to focus on how there are similar landscapes and patterns found both inside the body and outside in the world, where waveforms are found in heartbeats and waves in the oceans and seas, and then branching is found both in the lungs and in trees, and flowing patterns are found both in blood flow and blood vessels as well as rivers, where I proposed that I wanted to create this work through using data related to the heart and lung as my starting point, as my material, where every single inpatient's room would have a completely unique design. And so that's what I pitched, and then I won the pitch, and so I had to figure out how to make that happen. So even though the end output was digital, I still started out by engaging with this subject in a very manual way. So drawing and planning it all on paper and getting my head around the project and the data through this analog act of marking and coloring and counting. And then I started to research what data sets were available to match these 3 areas of the body. And then the team at the hospital and I agreed that using anonymized data directly from patients and staff would make a compelling connection between the artwork and the Papworth community. So I ended up working with anonymized pulse data directly collected from the community of staff, inpatients and outpatients to represent the heartbeat. And then the spirometry test data that I got from Papworth medical researchers, this test is used to diagnose lung issues. And then echocardiogram data I also got from researchers. And the echocardiogram test, it tests the pumping capacity of the heart and the intensity of the blood flow out of the heart into the body, so my highly technical description. And so I had all this data, we gathered it all, and then that was used as the core material and used as a seed to inform these flowing and branching and wave-like patterns across these doors. So these are the close-up examples of the 3 final designs, colored according to the interior design palette for the hospital, where I kept the design very calm, simple, spare, and linear. And now this isn't a traditional data visualization. I'm not designing something to keep all of the online data viz and chart critics happy, but I'm thinking more about creating a space using data for someone who's come out of surgery, for a pacemaker, or bypass surgery, or heart transplant, or something like that, and so on. And so this is what they look like in more detail, where for one floor we use this research echocardiogram data to create this natural flowing pattern across the glass, where the number of particles and then the variability and the turbulence of the flow was dependent on various data points from the echocardiogram tests. And this is just an example of how they unfold across a few of the doors. And then for another floor, Mike created a processing sketch for me to work with our collected pulse data, where I was able to loop and trim this data in various ways to create these subtle waveform patterns, which again, this is just an example of like 5 of the 80 variations of doors that there were. And then on the final floor, I used the lung data, the spirometry tests, to inform variation in a series of branching plants that then alluded to the branching found in the lungs. And again, just an example of what that variation looked like across these room doors as well. So this is a sneak peek of some photos that were sent to me of the work during the install, though I've yet to visit and document it on site, as it's opening for patients sometime next year. And so for me, as a designer, I'm really excited to be able to bring a design using data as its main material and data visualization as the design process into the fabric of such a really wonderful, incredible space. So yeah, that's an example of how my design process works, how I work with data in this less traditional way. But I've often found for some parts of the data visualization community that there can be this preference to strictly define the borders between data visualization and art, or data viz and communication design, and never shall these spaces meet. But for me, I see these borders as blurry, and I really like to work in the blurred in between with objective, I have that in quotes because as objective as possible, data visualization on one side, and more subjective communication and graphic design on the other. And then depending on the project, I'll balance these two sides in different ways, all the while enjoying the interesting challenge of working in between disciplines and not quite fitting. Now, finally, above all else, my background is in communication design as a communication designer. And because of this, I really like to try to communicate to as wide an audience as possible. That feels like the ultimate design challenge to me. And one of the design challenges that I'm most interested in is to inspire lay people to care about data, which isn't easy, as many people and it could be many of you in this audience see data as boring, cold, clinical, computerized, far removed from their daily lives, and bigger than they're able to comprehend. And I think if we want people to begin to care about something that will impact their lives for the foreseeable future, then we need to experiment and explore different approaches. So because of this, I'm also interested in extending the visual languages designers use to work with data, exploring ways of presenting data that, besides being legible, are more memorable and more expressive to a layperson audience who might just be learning about data for the first time. So this could mean making data danceable, like this project as the first data artist in residence at Facebook, where I converted a month of a couple's interactions on Facebook timelines, all with their consent, into dance steps, bringing their digital dance across timelines into a physical space. Or it could mean making data hoppable, such as my open data playground for the Southbank Centre in London, where hopscotch games were created from open data sets in order to communicate how open data sets are online for anyone to interpret and play with however they choose, even if some interpretations are more unconventional than others. It's all fair game with open data. Or it could also mean a project that's touchable and wearable, like this art commission I created with Miriam Quick, where we explored physical ways of communicating open air quality data from Sheffield, England, in a memorable, experiential way for a citizen audience who might not be interested in air quality or data in general. And one part of the project presented weeks of particulate matter data as something you could touch and wear. And then the other part communicated a day of pollution levels in Sheffield through glasses that would make your vision more or less polluted and hazy depending on the data. So, besides the aforementioned creative experiments, I've also been getting closer to understanding how to make data more accessible or engaging through this next project I will show you, which was a collaboration with Giorgia Lupi, the creative director of the information design agency Accurat, based in New York and Milan. Now, Giorgia and I met only twice in person when in 2014 we decided to collaborate with each other. And we wanted to collaborate because we have a lot in common. And the main thing really being that we both don't really code, as I mentioned, but we prefer to work with data in this very handcrafted analog way, which is in contrast to the often standard use of computing and code as part of the data viz process. So we decided to challenge ourselves. Since data viz was the language we spoke for work, we'd use this language to get to know each other better, ideally in an analog, hand-drawn way. And so together, we came up with a project we called Dear Data, a year of sending each other hand-drawn data postcards back and forth across the Atlantic. So starting on the 1st of September 2014 and lasting a year, every week we collected our personal data around a shared topic to investigate aspects of ourselves and our days to then share, that we would then share with another person. So it was quite esoteric topics like how often we laughed, or every time we were alone, or every mirror we looked in, and so on. And so as you can see from the themes we selected, we mainly chose to focus on topics requiring manual data collection. So focusing on what computers can't gather, or at least not yet, and really trying to move beyond the usual quantified self data into something more akin to personal documentary, where the main pursuit is to use this data capture to make sense of our world, to connect and be present in our days and week, and then also to create a souvenir to then send to the other person. And so then, we had this data, we collected it in this manual way, and then at the end of the week, we would spend time analyzing our data, and then drawing the visualizations and annotations on a postcard. And then once we were finished, we would drop the postcards in our mailbox or postbox and wait with our fingers crossed. And then if all went well, the postcard would hopefully arrive at the other person's address, and then we'd grab a coffee, sit down with a postcard, and read and learn more about the other person's life. Through this format, every week was an exploration of small data that was very personal, where our choices in data collection of what we chose to include and not to include function as a unique representation of each person. And so over the whole year, the project became a fragmented self-portrait sent to the other, where this weekly rhythm of observing, collecting, and drawing finally culminated in a collection of 104 unique hand-drawn data visualizations. So that was a very quick introduction, but if you want to see, this is my shameless plug. If you want to see all the postcards close up and in detail, they're found in book form along with tons of other hand-drawn illustrations describing how the project unfolded over the year. I don't know if it's in the bookshop or not, though. I'll have to check. But so besides the book, one of the most exciting things is that all of our postcards, plus our planning sketchbooks to plan out each week, are now in the permanent collection of the Museum of Modern Art in New York. So George and I are really, really proud of that as well. And I think this and the book are really unbelievable results from what was just a personal project started by two women over a beer, which is how all good projects begin. Yay! So that's a great, we're incredibly proud of that. But I think one of the things that we are also really, really proud of with the project has been the public response to Dear Data. As it seems, this manual domestic way of introducing people to data resonates with them. And we've also received emails from people starting Dear Data correspondence projects of their own, or are using it as part of their teaching materials from primary school to university and beyond to help students learn to collect and present data. And this is just an example that we were alerted to this week that I'm particularly taken with, where fifth graders, or sort of 10-year-olds, at the Lovett School in the US were doing a project collecting how often they said thank you, which is one of the things we did for a week. And so this is just some of their results, which I think is like a really charming thing to know that children are collecting this data. So yeah, it's really lovely to see kind of what people are doing on their own. And a wider audience has connected with this project in a way we never anticipated. And it has led myself to ask the following question. With this project, what aspect of the human experience were we tapping into that made people so excited about this small data? Now, I don't know if you can hear it, but I have an American accent. So I'm an American who spent the last 15 years in the UK. So, and as I've made my home in my newfound country, at some point I stumbled upon a British slang term that piqued my interest. And it's, this is the one. All right, I'm gonna, no! Okay. Oh, I have done the next slide. I've done a lot of slides. Can I just exit out and try to exit back in? I've never seen this before. Okay. Pardon me. Let's try this again. Oh gosh. You know what? This is going to be good. So that's my new digital installation career ready, like the new ready to go. So all right. So I'll just describe what was on screen. So. A slang term that I was really interested in the UK is the slang term anorak, and it's now one of my favorite words. So if I can describe the word anorak to you, the actual definition of this word is an anorak is one of these, it's a utilitarian kind of outdoors waterproof jacket with a hood, and it's probably in a green, this color of my dress. But the slang version of the British slang version of the term anorak is someone who collects minuscule, arcane, and quite often useless bits of information. And this comes from the Trainspotter, where it's the jacket stereotypically worn by a British train spotter whose passion is to stand on the edge of a train platform and collect all of the locomotive numbers as they pass by on the tracks. So this is this term, and I will explain it in more detail now. So if we look at a train spotter's notebook, which I had a video of him up there, and we can see what he's looking in. So this is a train spotter's notebook from a train enthusiast called Trevor Urmel, and this is from 1967. And so you can see, so he's been standing on a train platform collecting all of these locomotive numbers, and he's noted down the date and the day of the week, and then carefully listed all the locomotive numbers down the page, adding different contextual details if required. Where here, this train spotter on the edge of a cold, lonely platform, this anorak, he's not collecting data for statistical insight, but instead the primary focus is connecting with a subject that he cares about. And besides their trusty notebook and pen, the other tool in a train spotter's arsenal is one of the many publications that compiles a comprehensive list of all the locomotive numbers organized by their different classes and capabilities. And this example is from 1950. So the spots collected in that previous notebook that I showed you would be carefully transferred to these booklets, where the spotted locomotive numbers were carefully lined with a pen and ruler. And I find this little unassuming booklet incredibly moving as a record of an unknown person's experience of getting closer to something they care about through observing, collecting, and marking. And after researching train spotting, I began to search for other types of anoraks, so this slang term, for whom the process of observing and collecting small and mundane data offers satisfaction and enjoyment. And so I'll show you a few more examples, starting with lorry or truck spotters. So this lorry spotter community, these anoraks, are on screen, are Stobart spotters. So they're a community of 25,000 people who spot vehicles run by Eddie Stobart, which is a massive transport firm with all sorts of vehicles moving things, across the UK and Europe. And the appeal in this type of spotting, of this data collection, is that the company gives every vehicle a name, and it's normally a woman's name, though we will leave the question of why only women's names for another talk. But you can see some examples of these names on screen. So Elizabeth Phyllis and Rainbow Valentina. So they're like really brand names they give the trucks. And you can also become a member of their fan club, and one of the key benefits of this is that you're able to access the most up-to-date spotters handbooks with all of the names and the full fleet, so then as you drive around the country, you can tick the names off of your list. So they're anoraks, they're collecting data, they're spotting the trucks, and they're adding to their data set. Now, another community of British anoraks are Groundhoppers, whose goal in life is to visit as many different football or stadiums as possible. And this pursuit is formalized with the 92 Club. And in order to be a member, a person must attend association football game at the stadium of every current Premier League and Football League club in England and Wales. So once you become a member, you'll receive a special lapel pin or tie to show off your achievement. And over on the right is someone's 92 club application form from the 80s, where you can see the data they collected about each match. So the date, ground, team, opponents, the score, and even the attendance. So this is data, but they're not visualizing it. They won't make a statistical analysis of these various attendances, but instead this is a way of documenting and of keeping score of a particular moment. Now, if we look at anoraks found globally, we can start with fans that fill out baseball scorecards at American baseball games. And the way that baseball scoring works is a scorecard's double-sided, and it's got a team on each side with the players down the side and the innings of the game across the top. And using a set of cryptic abbreviations and notations, you notate each play as it happens in the game. And once the game is over, the resulting symbols and abbreviations become a souvenir of the game that you can always refer back to. And when the game ends and the scorecard's filled, fans don't go home and begin to analyze this data, but instead the filled out scorecard is kept as a souvenir, because really the main reason for scoring a ball game is to stay in the moment and to be present and be less distracted. Scoring the game to get in the game and to add to the enjoyment of spending a few hours in the ballpark. And if we look at another global anorak community, the bullet journal community, now the original bullet journaling method was created by an American designer named Ryder Carroll, but it has a very large community online. But as the community has grown, this original minimalistic method has given way to detailed journals filled with color, including hand-drawn habit trackers, motion trackers, sleep logs, and so on. So these could be tracked with an app, but these bullet journalists enjoy the satisfaction of putting pen to paper to record and document their lives. Now, finally, we have bird watchers, which is another global pursuit. And on screen is an example of a birdwatcher's logbook in the UK, where, as with the Trainspotters, you can carefully tot up all of the birds that you spot over a year or a lifetime. And then there's also space to add more qualitative data, and then even different symbols or abbreviations suggested to notate further information about the birds as well. And then when looking for bird spotters, I came across an article by Sano Nakasone about the birdwatching notebooks of James W. Elk. And these are collected in the Smithsonian, where he was a birdwatcher who collected 30 years of daily notes on the birds he saw in the area where he lived. So he wasn't a professional scientist, but he was collecting these birds to get closer to them because he enjoyed them. And so he would notate weather and other details relevant to his personal life, so not just bird watching. And I think what is the most poignant notation of all in his notebooks, in his data collection, he asked his wife, who is also a keen bird watcher, to mark when he died within his notebooks as well. So adding the single word fini with his date and time of death as the ultimate final observation in his collection. So, there are many others, but these are just a few examples of what I call anoraks, these minuscule data collectors. And you can see they all manually collect data and observations for many of the same reasons George and I did in our Dear Data project, where the act of observing is their way of making sense of a subject they care about, making a connection through being present and aware, and where the handwritten data they collect on their observations functions as a memory, a souvenir of this experience of engagement with their passion. And in a way, this type of observing that an anorak undertakes also functions as a type of performance. So this act of being like alert, ready, and aware, where the data collecting impacts your body and your demeanor and transforms how you feel about yourself and the world you're observing. And so for me, I really see this gathering of small data as valuable, where this very physical, almost performative way of making through noting and observing and marking can offer the same well-being and passion and enjoyment as other creative acts. So if you look at the Dear, oh, whoa, there it is, it almost went. Look at the Dear Data project, where we found treasure in our mundane by collecting data from our daily lives. And then you look at the output of an anorak, so all of these notations, jottings, and tallies from the Trainspotter. And you look at the output of my design process. And then, it's very obvious that both George and I are officially card-carrying anoraks as well. And after this research, we found our people. So this is the video of what an anorak is, since this one hasn't exploded the screen. So, but as you can see in this film, the term anorak is seen as being derogatory and negative in the UK, and it's seen to be nerdy, uncool, and antisocial to be collecting data on things you're passionate about, though obviously as an anorak myself, I disagree. Okay, so the next slide is it? Yes, nope. All right, okay. Okay, it's the grids. We realize it's the blue grids, for whatever reason, make it explode. It's interesting. Anyway, so something that I think is really interesting is that I call a lot of the data that anoraks collect outsider data, and where it's like almost a type of folk data, and I call it that because it's often data that is collected without a rigorous enough methodology to keep scientists or data scientists happy, or I also think outsider data is data collected by kind of groups that don't have any social currency, like the nerdy Trainspotters you see, or it's also data collected by people that don't even realize that they're collecting data in the first place. And I think at the same time, many of these people collecting outsider data are creating outsider data visualizations, where many of these visualizations or proto-visualizations in this world are imperfect, often designed for an audience of one instead of an outside viewer, where the analog experience of drawing and making the visualization is often more important than legibility or statistical insight. Now, recently, I experienced the collection of outsider data personally when I embarked on my biggest project of 2017, the birth of a small human, and then the 6 months of maternity leave keeping that human alive. And as I arrived home from the hospital, I downloaded a tracking app to record how often I was feeding my daughter. And so this is the data from the first couple of weeks, where purple represents sleep and yellow indicates every time I fed my baby. And it's obvious from these visualizations that these early weeks were, to put it politely, a complete shit show of sleep deprivation and just being in a state of shock. But this data collection was one of the things that kept me marginally sane, as through marking time in this way, it provided me with a semblance of control in a world of chaos and fumbling as I began to forge this connection with a new human. When I was in conversation with other women who had children around the same time, many other women were engaged in this careful observing and collecting of their babies' data. But when I asked them if they would consider visualizing this data or consider what they're doing to be a type of data collection, it became apparent, like myself, that statistical insight or visualization, it wasn't their priority or interest, but it was just a method to stay focused and be present in the early days of their child's life. And this experience with outsider data collectors reinforced a belief I have about anoraks. I think everyone is an anorak about something in their lives, even if they don't realize it. I think we all act like data magpies to some degree, collecting numbers and storing them away. Like so many people know their precise weight, watching every creep of numbers up and down the scale, or they might mark places they visited on a wall map at home. And I think many of these numbers could be considered as meaningless or as useless as the data an anorak collects. But I think that this imperfect outsider data, even if considered useless, is valuable, as the basic act of collecting data on a topic means it's important to the author and brings the author closer to subjects they care about. So if you look at the data you gather at a secret anorak, it's a way of figuring out what's really important to you. You discover your passions, your concerns, your anxieties, and so on. And, anxiety can be seen in another raw data set I collected. So that I've done nothing with this except put it on screen, where I gathered data on every time I was away from my daughter, starting with 3 hours of sleep in the wee hours of the morning in hospital after I had her. So, I initially found being with another person, like day in and day out, very overwhelming. And so keeping track was my way of coming to terms with this. So counting it really mattered to me. Although, I look at this with the eyes 6 months on, and I've reconciled myself to this new life a little bit more. But as you can see, these numbers and patterns that many anoraks and lay people, including myself, we collect, it documents a moment in time, and it can be something that you treasure for years. And so I think many people gather small data and carry it around to get closer to the things that matter to them. And really, this collection of this imperfect outsider data that anoraks collect is just a different shape or form of documenting and better understanding one's world. So some people document with photos, journals, or video, and some people document with data, spreadsheets, and tick marks. And I think when we think about data in this way, we can see a view of data that's very different to this cold perception of big data, where data and data gathering can be seen as warm, emotional, and part of the human story. Now, I really believe that one reason for my and Georgia's project's success is due to how it spoke to those latent anorak tendencies that we all have, where we're all data collectors, even if we don't realize it. And so I think finally, with your data, being an anorak is sort of moving from something very negative to something positive. What's really exciting is that a lot of these themes, this idea of anoraks and observing as a form of making and collecting data to be present, have come together in mine and Georgia's second book, Observe, Collect, Draw, which is a visual journal that we've created that most ages and abilities can use to document their lives through gathering and drawing their own data. And this was just released a month ago, so it's very new. With so many people starting their own Dear Data projects, we wanted to create a journal that would make the process less intimidating to a newcomer, and this is how it works. We've set up drawing rules and approaches for collecting your data, like in these very esoteric personal data sets on the left, and then on the right, you follow the rules for data, and then you draw them on the right. So it's things like you could use your past on the data set, where you can collect your data and follow the drawing rules on the left to draw it on the right, or you could draw your friendships and their related data to better understand your relationships with them, so drawing it on the right-hand side, or again, so we're thinking about like more manual data collection and moving it into different spaces. You can think about your daily adornment, or how carefully you dress yourself, the products you use, the order you put everything on, just to see, investigate this side of yourself you never thought of before, and then follow the rules on the left and draw them on the right. So, we're changing how we talk about data, reframing it into something that appeals to the human anorak tendencies we all have, trying to tap into that secret data that many people collect without even realizing it and treat it as valuable. So we're trying to embrace and highlight this different way of seeing the world through the eyes of a data collector. And as mentioned, it was only launched a month ago, and we're seeing lots of really great responses on social media, where instead of being something static and fixed in a moment in time, like our Dear Data book, the journal is beginning to take off a life of its own and become something dynamic and ever-changing. So we're sort of building a new community of anoraks, and so we're looking forward to see how it unfolds. Now, I just want to conclude this talk with a couple of final points. So after working with all these on these projects, I believe more than ever that we don't have to collect and visualize data for statistical insight, but now data is a material that can be used in a variety of spaces. And I really find this idea of data as this in-between material exciting, where a data set can be a scientific and analytical material that data scientists and data journalists work with, or a cultural artifact that artists might respond to, or the souvenir of an experience as collected by an anorak, eliciting completely different responses in these different spaces, and all of these responses are valid and valuable. And I really believe that it's this experiential data collected by secret anoraks. So this is the data that's often overlooked, and I think that this is the key to making data and data viz as concepts more accessible accessible to a wider audience. We're almost there, woo! And I'll be testing these thoughts at the National Maritime Museum in Greenwich, London, where I've just started it. So for the next 6 months, I'll be the data artist in residence, and I will be exploring how to use data collection and visualization as a way to listen to and respond to visitors, hopefully making the experience more participatory, engaging, and memorable. So watch this space. Now, finally, to conclude, since data is this in-between material used by anoraks, artists, and scientists, that's why working in the blurry borders that I mentioned earlier is so important. I think, as an example, if we held mine Georgia's Dear Data project and all of the resulting books and projects that sort of surround it up to traditional definitions, it doesn't really fit anywhere. It could be art, communication design, or data viz. It's probably all three, but its interdisciplinary qualities are an asset, not a failing. Now, would a data-driven project that firmly adhered to the very specific disciplinary rules of data viz and charts, of which there are many, inspire a child to collect their thank yous for a week and draw it? Or would defining a project only as an artwork inspire a data viz practitioner to make their commercial practice more human-scaled and more memorable? So I think by working in these purposely blurred spaces, we were able to ultimately reach that broader audience that I'm always trying to reach and help our practice to progress. And so I think there is more power in being that which doesn't fit than which does. And I really believe that all of us, in whatever field we specialize in, from designers to artists to data viz specialists, I think we all need to remember that the edges of our creative spaces, and in particular data, it's not fixed and steadfast, but is this constant conversation that's continually shifting and blurring. And so we should embrace and explore these in-between spaces in order to move our field and others forward. So thank you. Thank you for your patience. And I'm signing books upstairs as well. So thanks a lot.